Our guest tonight, inventor, scholar, all-around nice guy, Louis Buff Parry is with us. Again, Buff, thank you so much for taking some time to share your night with us. And we've got a couple callers stacked up already. You want to delve in with those folks first?
Why not?
All right. Caller, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio. You're on with Buff.
Good evening, Pat. This is Bill in New York. Hey, Buff.
Hey, Bill.
How are you doing tonight?
Well, it's a heat wave here, and it's a big storm, I guess, in your part of the continent.
Actually, we have a possible blizzard coming Monday night into Tuesday, but I'll leave that for that day. Buff, I have a question. Is there a link between the Shepherd's Monument and the inscriptions there and the decoding with the Pillar Stone of Jacob?
Yes. That's one of the ciphers I cracked or codes I cracked, and generally was considered to be the top decipherment of many that had come forward. The judges were at Bletchley Park, which is the center where the film, what is it? I think it's called the Imitation Game.
I believe so. Yes.
Yes, where the Nazi Enigma code was deciphered by Alan Turing and so forth. They were some of the judges, and then there were representatives of the British government and so on that went over all of these decipherments, and they all selected mine as being the best. And I'm only saying that not to brag, but to indicate that I must have struck something there with some degree of accuracy to have that much unanimity in approval. So the code that's carved on the Shepherd's Monument, which is adjacent to this beautiful hall called Shunkborough Hall on Litchfield Estate in an area called the English Midlands, that code ultimately reads that it reads in terms of a reference to the son of Joseph's, the second son of Joseph, and Joseph was the favored son of Israel or Jacob, and so the second son of Joseph, Ephraim, it was also Jacob's favorite grandson. So the Jacob was called the stone and the shepherd of Israel.
Right.
So he figures prominently in the Shepherd's Monument because the Shepherd's Monument is a reverse relief, the largest part of it, a reverse relief in marble of Nicolas Poussin's painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia, also known as Et in Arcadia Ego. There's a second painting with that same name, which actually was Nicolas Poussin's first draft of Shepherds of Arcadia. That one has more of the indicators of this holy family of Jacob and Rachel and Joseph and Benjamin. So we've got Joseph identified in chapter 49 of Genesis as being the stone, which can only be the stone that his father anoints on the way to Haran, which we talked about a little earlier. And then Jacob finds Rachel. He falls totally in love with her, and according to the Genesis account, he kisses her, and then he breaks into tears. He starts weeping, I guess, with joy, and it becomes a very long story that follows. But the stone of Israel is identified clearly as Joseph. So the pillow stone of Jacob and the stone of Israel are really one and the same stone. In Judaic tradition, they're definitely the same stone. So the code that I cracked describes the stone of Israel, who is Jacob and his son Ephraim. And it's important to know that in Judaism, at the time of Jesus, there were two different messiahs expected. One was called Moshiach ben Yehuda. The other one, which means the Messiah from Judah, and then you could go on and say Ben Daud or David through the line of David. And the other one, the suffering Messiah, is Moshiach ben Yosef ben Ephraim. So the suffering Messiah is associated with Joseph, because remember, Joseph was thrown down the well because of his technicolor robe that his brothers were jealous of, and then was sold off in Egypt, and then his mother dies, giving birth to his brother Benjamin. And just to make something clear at this point, in Nicholas Poussin's paintings, if you accept that the shepherd and the shepherdess and the two sons are that holy family of Jacob, Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin, you might ask the question, why is Rachel there since she died giving birth to Benjamin? How can she still be around and depicted in these paintings? The thing is, in the Bible, after all that happens, Jeremiah brings her up. And he says, I hear Rachel weeping in Ramah over her children who are no more. And then fast track to the New Testament, the Christian Bible, and you have in Matthew the same reference, hearing Rachel weeping in Ramah over her children. So she kind of haunts the Bible, and thereby becomes, if you will, immortal as the chapters continue. So there's a sense that she really didn't die giving birth to Benjamin, but continued on in a kind of a haunting way. So there's nothing contradictory about identifying the shepherdess as Rachel in the shepherd's monument. The code, getting back to the code, the reason that code is there, it has to do with an artifact that Admiral Anson commandeered from a fleet of ships that were headed from the Nova Scotia area of Canada to France, and they were some of the ships were sort of crippled from a storm and from a battle. So Admiral Anson, who's the part owner of Shugborough Hall, Litchfield Estate, and so on, he commandeers the ships, and it turns out that this stone, according to Alexander von Humboldt, was en route in 1746 to France. So
now,
everything. Yes.
I'm sorry. Who brought the stone to New England? Was it the Jacobites? And also, when you were looking into this with Jacob and Joseph, did you decipher anything in reference to the Bible that indicated, some of this also?
Well, we'll be getting into the Satuma code and its kind of spin-off codes that are in the Bible. But what was the first part of the question?
Who do you believe brought the stone to New England before it went back? Okay.
This is a very colorful answer, because the person who brought me to the repose of the pillow stone of Jacob, it was a master mason in Scotland who had a lot of influence around Rosslyn Chapel, which is featured in the Da Vinci Code, at the end of the Da Vinci Code particularly. He brought me right to what he thought to be the site where where Jacob's pillow stone was set. And really, when you look at the site that he points out, there's even a replica now of a pillow stone at that particular site on the top of a pillar within Rosslyn Chapel. So the Jacobites were favored in that part of Scotland, and particularly around Rosslyn Chapel, and like Jacobites always had done, and like Jews had done with the Ark of the Covenant, the Decalogue tablets or the stones of Moses and so on, they're brought into battle as kind of talisman to protect the soldiers, to protect the fighters. And And so they took that stone with them on their way to London, and they went through a place called Preston, England, which is in the northern part of northwestern part of England. And it was there that the Jacobites were apprehended, and 1,569 of them were exiled to New England. And they brought that stone with them.
Ah, okay.
And that was around 1716 when they would have hidden it. And then in 1743, January 1st, the Leverandry scouting party took it from the hollowing in a pillar that, by the way, had right next to it, or almost right next to it, another pillar on the top of which was carved the Hebrew word Preston. Not to forget, it was from Preston that the 1,569 Jacobites were arrested. Maybe we should back up just a little bit. Who were the Jacobites? They were a people who were
Buff?
Yes.
Can I stop you just for a second? We've got to take a quick break. Bill, you going to hold through this?
Sure.
All right, our guest tonight, Buff Parry, will be back in just a little bit. Quick commercial break. You're listening to Fringe Radio. Check us out at Fringe Radio Show. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. On the phone with us is Buff Parry and Bill Forte. Go ahead, Buff. We were going to talk a little bit. You were going to talk a little bit right before we started. A little bit of the backstory before we went into the break.
Yes. Who are these Jacobites? The term is misleading. You would think it has to do with Jacob somehow, but the Jacobites named themselves after King James II, who was deposed. It turns out that Jacob, the word Jacob or Yaakov or Jacob, becomes James through its morphing through European copying of documents and then the different sound patterns that the name drifts through. This isn't my discovery. This is standard classical knowledge. So the Jacobites are in reference to King James II. So what is it about King James II that has caused all this stir up in historical Scotland and Ireland and Wales and amongst the Quakers and Jews and everybody else, it seems, but English Church of England followers? It was when James II had expressed the need and virtually the requirement of the Church of England to embrace Presbyterians, and most Celtic people were Presbyterian in those days, to embrace Presbyterians, to embrace Quakers, to accept and embrace all kinds of people, Jews included, and Catholics. Well, that was the death knell of his career as king, by saying that the Church of England needed to embrace Catholics, which he was, meant to them that for sure this King James II is a papist. He's definitely tilting toward Rome, the Vatican, and we got to get rid of him. So they booted him off the throne. It happens that he was also of the famous Stuart line of monarchs, and that's a very potent, powerful lineage. That whatever else you might be, Presbyterian, Jewish, Quaker, etc., the Stuart line was highly regarded, and so there has been a continuous attempt from 1688, when James II was deposed, to get that Stuart line back on the throne, to the extent that when George Washington was asked to become king of America, he declined the invitation, but he said, and he sent 4 emissaries to the Vatican. This is in the Manawater Papers and the Congressional Record, this is what I'm saying. He sent 4 emissaries to Rome, I say the Vatican, which really I think is where they ended up, but to Rome, and they found the son of Bonnie Prince Charles Edward Stuart, and Bonnie Prince Charles Edward Stuart was the heir apparent of the Stuart line, not sitting on the throne, obviously, because of the monarchs that had, taken control, the kings George, they fought against, that the colonies fought against and won. And that's what the American Revolution was all about. Really quickly, just to get to one of the points, many people, including myself, say that the American Revolution was the ultimate Jacobite victory, despite all of its losses in uprisings previously. Anyway, those 4 emissaries who go to Rome to try to recruit the son of Bonnie Prince Charles Edward Stuart to become King of America.
Wow.
Were not successful because because that line did not see a future, of a monarchy within something called a republic. So there was that issue there, a couple of other issues as well. But I think in the bigger picture here, when we're talking secret societies like Rosicrucians and Freemasons that seem to have so much to do with the founding of America, these are different Masons and different Rosicrucians than what was happening in Europe and in Britain. They definitely supported the American Revolution, where others may not have, especially in Europe and in UK, what's UK today. And we know that because of the Anson brothers who owned Litchfield Estate, Shugborough Hall, brought the stone to the estate, when they record in their own logs and diaries that they would go and meet and greet the Jacobites who were marching en route to London to recover the throne. So, and at the same time, they had adherence and allegiance to the Church of England. But we know with certainty that the Anson brothers, were dabbling deeply in Rosicrucianism and were practicing Masons, but not of the normal variety that came out of the, if you will, the Masonic closet in 1717 and built the first Masonic lodge that was overt anywhere in the world, and that's again 1717 in the city of London. So it gets very confusing when when we have secret societies at work that have within their own ranks this division that is marked by the Atlantic Ocean. Those on one side are of one ilk, those on this side of another, and one supporting the American Revolution and wanting to defeat the kings named George, the 3 in succession. And when on the other side, look how many Freemasons there are in the present royal family. I think most of the males are practicing Masons.
Well, I have another question for you.
Yes.
It's interesting because not only was the stone brought back by Admiral Anson, but then you also had the connection with the gold that also was on the ships, and that has a connection to Oak Island, the Money Pit, and then with all these the societies, the secret societies, then you also throw in the twist of the supposed location of the Ark of the Covenant in the Money Pit. So it's interesting how all of this seems to have a connection.
It does. It does have a connection. I'm not a major proponent of the idea of the Ark of the Covenant being in the Money Pit on Oak Island. I'm not saying that it with certainty that it's not there, but the gold you're referring to is extremely interesting. There was a ship that was laden with gold and silver, jewels, and porcelain that went up onto a coral reef, and the rear end of it wasn't on the reef. So this young fellow shipbuilder out of Boston named William Phipps found it, and he decided that he was going to bring all the silver first to King James II, which he did, and this is well recorded. He gives King James all of the silver from the Concepcion, this treasure ship, leaving all the gold on it, but thinking no one else is going to plunder it because it was a quirk that he was able to find it to begin with, and was going to return to it immediately after delivering the silver to King James II. But in the midst of doing that, after the silver was delivered, King James II was deposed.
Right.
So then what do we have? We've got a new king, William of Orange, who I won't say ascended to the throne. He just ripped off the throne. And William of Orange, is thought to have been by some of the people, especially the current investigators of, the Oak Island mysteries, and the last group as well, as being the person who was to receive the rest of the gold. They thought that Phipps, who was made a knight by King James II, so it was Sir William Phipps, would have taken the gold off of the Concepcion, stashed it in the Oak Island money pit, and then at some point delivered it to William of Orange. The problem with that idea is, if that was his intent, and if he had gone against the very king who had knighted him, why didn't he just load it on his ship or ships and deliver it to the new king?
Right.
Why would he have, as is thought, brought the gold and put it into this pit on Oak Island in Nova Scotia? What would be the point if he wasn't a Jacobite? But he clearly was, in my opinion, and I'm the only, Oak Island person who's arguing this point. I was connected to Oak Island back in 2004 when I did my first decipherment of the Shepherdess Monument, and a reporter got a hold of all my documents that I had shared with the Bletchley Park people, where the Enigma code was deciphered. And his name is Nick Fielding, and he wrote this full-page feature on my decipherment in the London Times in the front section. So it was very prominent. It had gone around the world. Everybody who read the London Times couldn't have missed it. So when I came back to Canada, that following January, I had come back in late November, and there was a lot to do about my decipherment here. It hit the news, and so I was interviewed. There was a BBC, CBC interview, and so on. The next month of January, after all the flurry of activity and attention had happened, I received an email from the people who were doing the investigation of Oak Island at that time, and they said, we understand that you've drawn a connection between the Shepherdess Monument's, secret encrypted code and Oak Island and the money pit. Well, I hadn't actually quite done that in the manner that they had interpreted it, but nevertheless, it was a very interesting bridge, and I walked on it, and I learned a lot more about Oak Island, and I also learned that this strange, huge amount of gold was delivered to Scotland in 1746. This is the same year that stone was apprehended, I should say, by Admiral Anson, but right. Was to be delivered to France, to the Secretary of State for King Louis XV. This gold was deposited in Scotland, in the northwestern coastal area of Scotland, and it was intended for the supporting of the Jacobite rebellion. But it didn't arrive until the Battle of Culloden, and the Battle of Culloden was lost by the Jacobites. It was the last great battle that the Jacobites had until you consider the American Revolution, which I do as being an ultimate Jacobite success. So this gold that was intended for the Jacobite rebels ends up, most of it still hidden, stashed, but some of it was secured and went to the king, the new, well, not then the new king, but it would be King George. So we know there was an attempt to get, to say that the gold was taken directly out of the money pit of Oak Island, is not a stretch. I think it makes perfect sense because it was said to have come from a French source.
Okay.
It didn't say from France.
Right.
It said from a French source. Well, it turns out that Nova Scotia was French then.
Okay.
And the Confederacy of Indigenous Peoples were called the Wabanaki Confederacy, who really wouldn't have allowed anyone to be tampering around with that money pit, who would be serving the new king or any of the King's George. So my argument is that the gold was taken out of the pit, and it was delivered to Scotland for the use of the Jacobites, but it arrived too late. We know that it arrived too late. On record, it arrived too late. It was hidden, some of it, and there's an archaeologist right now working with BBC doing a whole lot of coverage of this and investigation. They may find a whole lot of gold, but a lot of it was recovered, and it ended up with the king.
Okay, I know that Pat's coming up on a break really soon, but one of my friends who's listening right now just wanted me to ask you this quick question. Are you aware of the works of John Ackerman and Emanuel Velikovsky? And if you do, what are your thoughts on them?
Well, Velikovsky, I'm aware of. Who I don't recognize the first name, but
yeah,
John
Ackerman.
John Ackerman. No, but Velikovsky, Gurdjieff, and Velikovsky, and that clustering of of people that have very different alternate theories of the universe. I'm aware of them. I haven't really studied them that carefully to say anything authoritative to the question.
Okay, Buff. Actually, it was a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you, and you have a great night. And Pat, you do as well, and I'll speak to you soon.
Take care, my friend. Thank you for calling in.
Have a great night.
Bill, look for my YouTube channel that some of my students are putting up. It's called Truth in the Buff,
okay.
And it's not up and running yet. It won't start until the end of the first week of February.
Will do, Buff. Have a great night.
Take care, Billy.
Yeah, you too.
Stay warm.
Bye. Yes. Bye.
Bill Forte from New York. Nice guy. He's the guy that connected me with you, Buff.
Oh, okay.
He said,
Okay.
He goes, this gentleman's amazing, and he hit it right on the head. So much stuff here, Buff. I mean, there's just so much to all this. We've got to take a break for other stations. Our guest tonight, Louis Buff Parry. We're going to talk about a lot more. You're listening to Fringe Radio. Check us out on the web at www.fringeradioshow.com. Welcome back, everybody, to Fringe Radio. Buff, some amazing stuff has come our way from Mr. Da Vinci.
Yes. You mean just now?
It's just over. No, I mean, it's just so overwhelming. I mean, there's just so much of this.
I'll give you one more tidbit before we maybe step onto another stone along this path.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Leonardo da Vinci, as a boy, attended an academy called the Toscanelli Academy with someone else, one of his good buddies named Amerigo Vespucci. And, America is named after Amerigo Vespucci.
Yes.
It turns out that in 1477, Christopher Columbus, who later became an advisor to Amerigo Vespucci, Christopher Columbus, in his own records, writes that in 1477, not 1492, he took a voyage to a place after Thule that can be either Iceland or Greenland. In those years, both were called Thule, and he went so many leagues from Thule to a place where the water rose X number of feet. I think it was 50 feet, and during the ebbing and tiding of the Bay of Fundy.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that is the only location it could have been that he was describing, the Bay of Fundy, because between the point of departure and the area called Thule and and then coming down the East Coast, there is no other area, there is no other site where the ebb and the tide reaches, a 50-foot ascent and descent, height and depth, in terms of the fluctuation that happens daily. So we've got Christopher Columbus making record of in 1477 of this event, and at that point, no one had reported on the Bay of Fundy before. So in 1477, we've got Columbus recording that he had done this as a youth, and that goes to the whole area of secret voyages and all the covert activities that were going on globally in terms of empires and stashing gold and stashing treasures and so forth. But then what happens? In 1499, we have Amerigo Vespucci in a letter to his patron stating explicitly that he followed the earlier voyage described to him by Christopher Columbus, which brings you right by that Oak Island, because
right.
On the other side of it is the Bay of Fundy. So there's something going on in all of this that is not yet fully understood, and I think there are going to be more documents, found in archives. Some of these archives have so much that hasn't been read. Like, why did we just learn, only recently about Leonardo's mother and this fingerprint stuff, and all of those new understandings of the nature and heritage of Leonardo da Vinci? You'd think that would have been discovered some long time ago. There's so much more to be discovered, and my hunch is that Leonardo, because he was close to Amerigo Vespucci, may have known about the Oak Island situation. I'm not asserting that he did. I don't think there's enough evidence to actually make that argument, but there is certainly enough evidence to make the argument that he was aware of the region, and that awareness would have been fed by his good friend Amerigo Vespucci, and then Christopher Columbus himself passing it along to Amerigo, who then would have confided in Leonardo. So who knows? We may have Leonardo somehow associated with pre-Columbian North America.
Can I go out on a real fringy, give you a real fringy question and get your thoughts?
The name of your show.
Do you feel that? How do I put this and not sound like a crackpot? Do you feel that Leonardo and maybe some others like him, maybe are time travelers? Do you think that they're the likes of a Tesla? I mean, there's a lot of interesting things we hear about Tesla. Do you think these people could be, I don't want to say aliens, I don't want to use that word, but do you think there could be more to these people than we even realize? Or do you think that maybe when you look, when I started going through his inventions, just for some of those that don't know, he essentially, he came up with what's known today as the ball bearing and the parachute and an ornithopter, the machine gun, diving suits, an armored tank. I mean, so much. Something he calls the aerial screw, which is now the helicopter, even into some robotics. Back in that time frame, nothing like this was ever heard of. Do you think that maybe there was some divine inspiration? Maybe he saw something. Again, I'm going out on a limb here on this one, Buff, but just to get your thoughts and takes on it.
Well, there is a mystery, without a doubt. I don't think any geneticist could really settle into a paradigm about Leonardo that would be satisfactory enough to explain how any one person could have had that scope, that much ability in one head. It just amazes me. So yeah, I think the best I can do is suggest that there is a mystery going on with him, and he did see something in the heavens. And he wrote about it, And you heard the description. Those were his words. Why people haven't focused on that is interesting in itself. What's the problem with having Leonardo? We have presidents of the United States who saw flying objects. Why not Leonardo too? And is that connected to his brilliance? I wouldn't rule it out. I definitely wouldn't rule it out. I don't think there was any Anunnaki Nephilim association there, but there is something in the mysterium that Leonardo is all about, and who knows? I've got a few more decades in front of me. This is one of my pursuits. His obsession with the Octagon and what I've learned about the Octagon is such that when it left nature and entered human culture, when and where that happened, I've pinned that down. And when you follow the continuum of that, and you see how Leonardo was completely obsessed by the Octagon more than any other, geometric shape, there's something about that, and what we're touching on in terms of other terrestrial and extraterrestrial intelligences. It seems to me. I mean, there's a whole thing we could get into about the Octagon in the biological systems that is so puzzling and so mysterious. But that maybe we'll end up taking a whole lot of time. I don't know if you want to get. It's up to you, Pat. If you want to get into the biblical code that.
If we could, and we definitely want to talk. We definitely want to touch base. We've got about 8 minutes left on this side. We've got a break, and then we've got another hour. I would definitely like you to talk a little bit about the salamander. I think that would have hit definitely of local interest. But if you wouldn't mind just talking about the Octagon, maybe I can't say breeze over the top of it, but maybe give us a condensed version of it.
Right at this moment.
Sure, whatever. It's up to you.
Okay. Well, I'll give you an incredible example of what the power of the Octagon is. In cellular evolution, there is something called the prokaryotic cell, and then there is the advent of the eukaryotic cell. A prokaryotic cell is a cell that has no nucleus. A eukaryotic cell has a true nucleus. Something happened that caused this incredible leap from prokaryotic cells to eukaryotic cells, and that thing that happened was this what's called the nuclear pore complex.
Okay.
I call it the nuclear portal complex, and you'll understand why in a moment. It's this perfectly symmetrical octagonal cylinder that is called a pore, and it's in the wall of the nucleus wall, not the outer cell wall, but the nucleus wall. In the space that's between the nucleus wall and the outer cell wall, you have something called cytoplasm, and in the nucleus you have something called nucleoplasm. This strange octagon that appears out of nowhere suddenly conveys, and it knows, it senses, it conveys what geneticists and cellular biologists are calling cargo from the cytoplasm to the nucleoplasm. It knows what to allow in and through its own structure and what not to. This isn't even a cell. It's a part of a cell. Without that, the life as we know it never could have happened. It never would have happened. Whether we want to invoke divine origins in terms of the creation of life or not, that arrival of that nuclear pore complex that is a perfectly cylindrical octagon is, it is planted all of a sudden in order to create the ongoing continuum for the eukaryotic cell's survival, which means all of life in effect, other than a virus. or a bacteria that are prokaryotic, generally.
Right.
So I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Octagon, and such an elegant, perfectly symmetrical thing that it is in cellular evolution. It baffles me. And why would that geometric form be so important to Leonardo da Vinci, given everything else he did? It's a clue to his purpose in existence, to his motivation to design with the Octagon all over the place in all kinds of things. He even designed an octagonal mirror chamber, and he said you enter this chamber, and you will come out knowing yourself much better.
Wow.
Who knows? Maybe that's the time machine that
maybe. Some people, he is in time. Not in time, but there's been some past references that he's. Some people feel that he's almost a prophet-like individual.
Well, I would say he's a prophet of the new I don't want to say new age, because I mean of the age of the Renaissance onward. Definitely, he's a pivotal moment that without which a whole lot would not have happened and could not have happened. So in that way, and he wrote prophecies. He has a whole section called prophecies, and he called the Novo Prophete when he was referring to Mohammed, the new prophet. He called him, and that was on that had to do with his writings about the end time, the deluge and the earthquakes and the floods and all of that, which goes to Isaac Newton's decipherment of what he called a code found in the book of Daniel that he links to Revelations. It's the same motive, finding the time of the emergence of the Messiah and then of the end. And it's interesting that these two great towering, brilliant minds, Sir Isaac Newton and Leonardo da Vinci, both went to the Bible to be able to put forward notions of the deluge and the apocalypse, which is the other word for Revelation, actually. But if we can start that now, if you want.
Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, and we've got to take a quick quick news break, and then we'll have another hour. I'll be
able to get to the salamander, no question.
Okay,
but we should go through the Bible code before we get to the salamander, because of the seraphim order of angels that really have everything to do with the salamander.
And we'll talk on that right on the other side of the news. Now you've got. You were mentioning about a YouTube channel coming up with your students. You want to talk a little bit about that? We've got about a minute.
Sure. The first 2 episodes are now being edited. They will deal with the Oak Island mysteries and my role in all of that, and that won't start up until the end of the first week of February. We're hoping, it looks like the first 2 episodes will be posted by that time. And I really encourage everybody to go to this channel, because it's going to be ongoing, and I'll deal with the Leonardo issues, and I'm still learning so much more and decoding so much more of Leonardo as time passes, that such that there will be episodes dedicated just to this subject of Leonardo alone. But right now it's the Oak Island episodes, episode 1 and episode 2, dealing with the present activities at Oak Island, and then what has gone on in the last 10 or 15 years there.
Sounds good. We're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break, a news break and a commercial break, and we'll be back on the other side. Our guest tonight, Louis Buff Parry. Check out his website at louisbuffparry.com. That's Parry with an A. Let's get back to our guest tonight. Buff, again, thank you so much for being here. You can find Buff's website at louisbuffparry, that's Parry.com. Thank you so much for spending a few hours with us.
And Lewis is Louis, not Lewis.
There you go, like Jerry.
Yeah, very French.
Very
even
French.
Though my grandfather, who gave me that name, and it was his name, was definitely not French. He chose that particular spelling for whatever reason, I guess because that's how his name is spelled.
Well,
but onward to the
yes,
what I'm calling the Setuma Code.
Okay.
And we can spend some time on this, and then if we can wrap up with the salamander component or aspect to all of this, I think we will have covered all of the interrelationships between these three major topics that we set out to address.
Take off, my friend. Go ahead.
Now, we're going to start with Sir Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, 6 years after he died, he didn't instrument this, but people discovered a lot of his writings that they were not, aware of, and they found something called Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse, which is Revelations of St. John, and it was published in 1733. It wasn't so long after that Thomas Jefferson ended up with one of the original edition copies, and his copy with his initials, his signature initials on it, was found fairly recently in the congressional record. So it has a home base in America as well as in Britain. But Isaac Newton had tried to make a connection between the Book of Daniel and Revelation. A lot of people today do that because of the identification of what is prophesied to be the circumstances at the end time or approaching the end time. But in so doing, he also wrote about the time of the emergence of the Messiah. Now, it's interesting that he focused on a chapter and verse in Genesis that has to do with the Messiah being sealed off or cut off or singled out. All those terms are used. In Torah studies and Talmudic studies, the beginning of this idea of being sealed off or cut off or singled out goes to two verses in chapter 47 that in the Hebrew scroll of the Torah, which are that's the first 5 books of the Old Testament, also called the Pentateuch and so on. The verses stand alone and are separated from other verses with a certain number of white spaces. The only 2 verses that flow one into the other in the Hebrew Torah scroll are in chapter 47 are verse 27 and verse 28, and I'll read them to you very, very quickly here. Verse 27 is, "And Israel continued to dwell," Israel being Jacob, the same Jacob we were talking about earlier, "and Israel continued to dwell in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they became settled in it and were fruitful and grew to be very many." And then 28 reads, "And Jacob lived on in the land of Egypt for 17 years, so that Jacob's days, the years of his life, came to be 147 years." Now, in our King James versions and the Vulgate and all of the other versions of the Bible, other than the Hebrew, we have these numbers for chapters and verses, and it's very clear. And we wouldn't know that the original Torah has these 2 verses without any separation. We just wouldn't know it from the editions that we read generally, unless we're reading a Hebrew Torah, the Hebrew Bible. So you have to dip into the layers of the way that the Bible came out through translation into all the various editions that there are to be able to find out about this. And I want to now just read you 2 sentences from an article that was published in the Jerusalem Post, January 10th, 1998, and it's about the Genesis 47:28, that second verse I just read to you. and what it says is that Rashi, and Rashi is one of the great rabbinical scholars in terms of the Talmud and the Torah. Rashi's interpretation is not based on the words themselves, but rather on the almost hidden meaning embedded in the lack of white space between the final verse, between the end of that verse called 27 in chapter 47, and then the beginning of 48. So there's a suggestion that there's a hidden meaning, and that's extremely important, because this goes to then the way that Sir Isaac Newton and I have tried to tackle this code.
Hey, Buff, I gotta stop you. I gotta sync back up with my other stations. Can you just hold that thought? We'll pick you right up again. All right, our guest tonight, Lewis Buff Parry. We're gonna take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back on the other side. Fringe Radio, www.fringeradioshow.com. Stick around. We'll be right back.